Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Some of you, I see some familiar faces, so thank you for coming back for our second session. Some of you, maybe this is your first time coming, so we really appreciate you joining this conversation. My name is Leslie Westerfelt. I am with Rama Consulting, and we are working with the district to just kind of facilitate a process for the decision making about the start and end times and potential schedule changes. I just want to reiterate again, there is no specific proposal on the table right now, we're not necessarily saying that a decision has to be made, but we want to make sure that we're having an open conversation about that, where we're having all of the voices included. And so right now, this is kind of blank slate, and I just want everybody to kind of keep that in mind. Before we get started, I do just want to kind of acknowledge some folks in the room. So we have our Pickering School District Board member, J.D. Postage, here with us. Thank you for joining us. We also have our superintendent, Dr. Briggs, and then assistant superintendents, Dr. Gillison and Dr. Hedgepath. So thank you all for being here. These are going to be excellent folks to help answer questions as we're going on through the night. I also want to acknowledge we do have some parents and teachers that are donating their time on what we are calling our stakeholder committee. And so that is another group that is helping us kind of guide this process. Really great sounding board for us as we're trying to figure out how to get this data in a way that we can make clear, open decisions with that. So would members of our stakeholder committee, if you're here in the room, would you give a little wave? Excellent. Thank you so much. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for the time that you've been spending with us. All right. So at our last session on that was back in August. It was actually the first day of school that we first met. So at our last session, we had a really broad conversation about how changes to the schedule would impact teachers, families, and just, kind of our general community. I think that what we all learned from that discussion is this is a really complex topic, and it touches a lot of different things, and it touches everybody in a very different way. And so today, what we want to do is we want to try and narrow the focus a little bit more. So while all things are important, not everything can be equally important. And so what we really want to do today is kind of figure out what our North Star is. What is our goal? What is going to be guiding this decision? How do we know that this is successful, right? That we are achieving what it is that we want ultimately for our students, which are really the heart of this matter here. And so we're going to try and figure out what it is that we're trying to accomplish, what priorities are really going to drive this decision, and then also give some weight to those priorities so that we can use that to really kind of help us figure out, okay, what is most important versus what are things that, would be great if they can work, but what are the core criteria for this decision? All right. So what we're going to do tonight, I'm just going to do a real quick recap of the first listening session, and that is just, mostly for those of you who weren't here. Also, I do want to remind you all that after each of these listening sessions, we are posting summaries on the website as well as the recording of these presentations. And so if you missed a previous session, you can always go back and just feel like you were right there in the room and then also see the comments and feedback that we had. We will be doing that as well for this session, so we will have this video posted as well as the results of the discussion that we're about to have. And then also we will have an electronic form where people can also, anyone who wasn't able to be here, those folks can also weigh in. And so if you have friends or colleagues that were like, I really wanted to come, that's okay. We're going to have an opportunity for them to weigh into this process as well. So we're going to do a real quick recap of that first listening session. And then because there was a fair amount of conversation about how we are comparing to other school districts, as well as kind of the length of time that Pickerington is doing, the length of the days and everything. So we've got some district comparison data that we wanted to share with everybody. And then we are going to move into a small group discussion. So we're going to head over to the cafeteria. We've got some worksheets and we'll talk more about that. But tonight is really about rolling up our sleeves and putting some work to this and trying to figure out how we can really organize this in a way that we can all make a decision and understand how that decision was made. Once we're done With the goal discussion, we will move into prioritization. We'll do a real brief group report out. Promise to get you out of here by 7:30. All right. So let's talk about what we heard during our first listening session. Just real kind of high-level highlights here. One of the things that came out loud and clear was this would definitely impact family schedules, and so that affects work, childcare, and just all manners of daily routine. We definitely heard about challenges for adolescents, so those earlier start times may be negatively impacting sleep and focus, and junior high as well as middle school. And so definitely a discussion, about particularly fifth graders and how this is even impacting them in some situations. Obviously, the effect on extracurriculars is a big deal and something that we don't want to neglect. We talked a lot about transportation issues. Again, I do want to kind of reiterate that the current challenges with the busing schedule are not created by the current school schedule and will not necessarily be fixed by a new schedule. But what we did hear about with transportation that we want to be cognizant of is this idea of long bus rides or students having to wait for buses or walk to bus stops in the dark, particularly during those winter months. Obviously, also, as we're talking about kind of childcare, that availability of siblings to be able to help with childcare is a really big issue that we heard a lot about. Also, just making sure, I guess, again, back to the scheduling complications, particularly for work schedules, and especially in those situations where maybe parents are working schedules that are not able to be adjusted very easily. Safety and weather concerns, again, kind of similar to the bus stop situation. Also heard a lot about the impact on specialized programs. And so this idea of making sure that our children still have access to music, arts, and other programs that really are enrichment programs and helping create a good experience for our students. And I think I've got siblings on there twice. I apologize for that. No, I do not. Sorry. Community and infrastructure growth. And so this is, just kind of being cognizant about how our schedule changes will impact the community around us. So those were kind of the key highlights that we heard during that first session. Because one of the things that we talked about was how much time the students are in school, we did a little bit of research to look at what some of the other districts are doing. And so this right here, this is just a sampling of some Central Ohio schools, so you can see kind of how the schedules are lining up. Not necessarily a ton of variation, and one thing that I will say is other than the exception of Gahanna, which recently changed their school schedules, specifically to make sure that their high schoolers were starting later, you're definitely seeing a trend here where elementary is starting later, high school starts earlier, and again, with the idea that a lot of that is to make sure that those older children are available to help with the younger ones after school. So I'm just going to let that sit there for a second and kind of look at that. The other way to look at this also is by just looking at the total number of hours during the day. And this was something that came up because Pickerington does have a slightly longer school day than not all, but most of the schools that we were looking at comparing. One thing that we do want to emphasize is while some of these schools have, shorter days, so if you just look at Dublin, for example, but the number of days that they are spending in the school year is longer. And so obviously there are regulatory requirements about how many hours are required for total curriculum, and there are different ways that you can spread that. And so we did just want to kind of emphasize here that even though elementary school, for example, is a total of 7 hours, we are not doing as many days as some of these other schools. And so that's kind of evening, that's just how the math is mathing. I'm going to pause here for some questions. Does anybody have any questions about this data? Yes, sir. JD. Mm-hmm. Sure.
But yeah, but I agree that there are different contracts.
Okay. Any other questions real quick? Okay. So let's talk about that a little bit more then and dive into a little bit more about why Pickerington has longer days. So the structure of the Pickerington school schedule is really designed to provide the targeted enrichment and education, or E&I, for students during the school day instead of after. So research has told us that intervention is most effective during the school day versus after school. And so Pickerington is kind of set up for success. They've got a smaller learning curve, particularly when the state passed the new high dosage tutoring laws when compared to other districts who are trying to figure out how to provide at least 90 minutes of intervention per week during the school day. So yes, it was longer, and you know, that has been that way for a while, but also as these new regulations are coming out, Pickerington is able to more easily align. Do we feel like that's a fair statement? No?
So, yeah, when we're talking about what Ohio Department of Education says is the requirement, 910 hours. 910 hours for grades K to 6, or sorry, 1 to 6, kindergartens differently. And then it's 712, 1,001 hours. So there's a reason why the Ohio Department of Education has a lower requirement, almost 100 hours less requirement for K-6. So because there are questions about the length of the day and what is an actual quality amount of instruction. And I agree that there's definitely benefits with that too, but there is also reasons why the state limits are different, because there's a different view by the Ohio Department of Education on what is the appropriate amount of time that should happen at the K-6 versus the 712.
Sure. And some of these districts where you're seeing smaller or shorter days as well, they may not be doing the enrichment and intervention services. So, no?
So you can compare report cards and all that stuff. I mean, obviously, these different aspects of the schools. I mean, again, how we allocate time, I know is really not my thing.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions just about the length of, please, Alicia.
I don't have a question. I just want to clarify for YGS ODE put that time out, and then afterwards, they came out with some state mandates that we have to take into our school day, and other school districts are scrambling. We provide our intervention for students that need it during the school day. ODE says, you don't have to do it during the school day, you can do it after school, and they can do it online. Now, most of us in here know that many of our kids aren't going to get online to do that intervention, and it's not going to be as impactful as doing it during the school day with teachers.
Thank you, Alicia.
So yes, they set those times, but then we have seen time and time again, there are more state mandates that come out since we've been in school this year, and that time was set before our school year started. So I just kind of wanted to level set with that, not right or wrong, just kind of share the information.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know how our performance compares to other districts? Great question.
We do actually, and Alicia, do you actually have some of that information actually on me? So, for example, if we're just looking at those scorecards, so the Pickerington report card rating is a 4.5 out of 5, and then let's see. If we just choose, let's see, Dublin, for example. Excuse me, one second. Okay.
So let's do this, Brad, because I don't want to confuse people. So the overall rating for Pickerington Local School District is 4.5 out of 5. It says that we exceed state standards. Some of the other districts, because we have the data, are ranked 3, some are 4, some equally 4.5, and then there are a couple that are 5. Yes, 5 out of 5. But we rank among the top. I just want to share that information. We are 4.5. So it just gets confusing, Brad, when you say 15 this. If we say overall rating is 5, because the question was where do we rank? We're at 4.5 out of 5. And we're striving to get to the 5.
So my question is, if in fact we have E&I time built into our day, and our kids are being pulled, our kids are being pulled during that E&I time, looking at our grade card, going 7 hours, and I'm an elementary teacher. I have kids from 9:05 until 4:15 in front of me. Why is it that our early literacy scores are a 3 at the elementary level? And I will tell you why. Because we are using the wrong assessment, vendor assessment, to qualify kids for intervention. So my question is, if it is true E&I time and we're looking at kids being pulled out for enrichment and intervention, then why aren't our scores higher than a 3?
So you're speaking of early literacy. Early literacy is very complex. Now, I'm not here to say right or wrong. I just want to level set with everyone. Last year, and the year before that, and the year before that, and the year before that, we were not a community eligible district. Community eligible means everybody eats free. That's where we are right now. We got that designation because of our economically disadvantaged families. And when you think about elementary students, early literacy, early childhood education, there's almost a 3 million word gap when some students start school. So we have more, and I'm not going to say elementary, you all do a fantastic job, but I just want to kind of level set. If we were the same district that we were 5 years ago, 6 years ago, maybe not. But if you open up your eyes and you can see it, we are a very diverse district. When I first started 3 years ago, this is my 4th year, we had 545 EL students, English learners. Right now, we're topping out at 1,000. And those students are coming in with no language acquisition. So those are just some of the things that I want you to temper on who we are now as a district.
Thank you, Alicia. And some of that demographic change information is also in our session 1 presentation as well, if you want that data. But that's a really good call out. And yes, to the point, we could probably talk all day about, how that breaks up and the E&I services and things. And so that should definitely be part of our conversations. But let's bring it back to kind of, that is one piece of all of the different factors that we all need to be looking at when we're talking about our schedule changes. I'll take one more question. Yes, sir. Okay.
Back to the schedule. You have elementary school kids, and again, I understand the issues with busing, but you have elementary kids that are being impacted the most by the busing delays. And those are the kids that don't need that. They can't cope with those schedule changes. They're on the bus until 5, 6 o'clock at night, trying to get home, and they're elementary school kids.
Right.
I don't understand why. I mean, that's got to be a little bit more important than the school time. Is our kids need to have the right environment.
Correct. And so with the busing schedule and kids getting home late, there are a lot of different factors, and there is a work group that is working on trying to improve the efficiency. One of those largest factors, though, is a staffing shortage, and that is causing some of the problems. Well, yeah, there are some new, sure. There are new incentive programs and stuff that the district is experimenting with to try and attract more of those drivers and make sure that we've got more subs.
But that staffing shortage is not going to go away. It's nationwide in every industry. And again, we're impacting the elementary school kids, the youngest group in our in our district, the most by those shortages.
Sure. Okay. Good point. Last one.
I was wondering, why
I cannot answer that. Alicia, do you have an answer?
That is a great question. And that is a question that we have been pondering as a leadership team. And what she is referring to is the 4 different transitions that our kids have to make. So that's elementary school, and then you transition, elementary school is K4. And then you transition to middle school, which is 5, 6. And then you transition to junior high school, which is 7, 8. And then we transition to high school, which is 9, 12. All right. Thank you for staying with us. So that is something I'm telling you we are looking at. It is something that it seemed, and I'm just going to say seemed, that the community had been comfortable with. But those are some other difficult conversations. I won't say difficult. Those are some other conversations, because it could look like K4. K4? Yes. K4 or K5. Then 6, 7, and 8, and we would call that middle school, but right now 7, 8 is junior high, so a little wording, and then 9, 12. So that is something that is being discussed.
Okay. So we're starting to get into some really good comments here, and part of what we want to do today, though, is make sure that we capture that. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we're going to set goals and priorities here, okay? And as we're having this conversation, these are kind of our guiding prompts or our guiding questions that I want to make sure that you're thinking about. So one of them is, what do we want a new schedule to accomplish, right? If anything. Maybe some of you are sitting here thinking, I don't want a new schedule. Okay, that's fine. And so therefore, but what do we want our schedule in general to accomplish, whether we're staying the same or moving it? Is there any kind of specific change that we want to see with this? And then how can this schedule really kind of reflect what we value, right? What is important to us and our children? So let's talk about what's important to us. What we did was we took all of the comments from the survey that had been done earlier this year, and also all of the feedback that we received during that first listening session, and we identified 10 different priority areas or 10 different categories of things that a lot of concerns or issues were raised around. So these first 4 categories, these are really about, kind of the student experience and the academic experience. So student health is something that we heard a lot about, how we can improve learning, making sure that those special services and then also the arts are being maintained, as well as extracurriculars. What our team, the consulting team, has done is we have drafted very high-level goal statements based on what we heard, but I want to really kind of emphasize these goal statements. So this first one that says schedules align with the research on adolescent sleep needs, we drafted that. Tonight, what we're looking for you all to do is tell us, is that the right goal? And if that is the right goal, well, what does that mean to you, right? Some might say it means that high schoolers don't start before 8:30 a.m., but that could be very different. What does that mean for junior high, middle school, things like that? So we have 4 categories that are really about that student experience and the academics. We identified 3 additional categories that are really speaking to that family and faculty experience, so all of the folks that are involved in creating this education system and caring for our kids. So, for example, for family needs, we could set a goal that just says, well, new times do not cause significant disruptions to families in the community. That's a pretty broad and vague statement, right? And so what we need to do tonight is figure out, well, what does that mean? What would a significant disruption mean? That's going to be different for everybody in this room. We want to collect that kind of input today. Same thing with teachers and staff. We definitely heard, teachers need to be able to maintain an appropriate work-life balance. But what that means for one teacher might be different for another one. And so right now what we're trying to do is just kind of get a sense of what does this mean in practicality. There's a third group of kind of priority areas, and these are really baseline. So these are things that are kind of non-negotiable. They're also things that we don't necessarily have a ton of influence on. With safety, we are going to dive into that a little bit more just because, as you mentioned, elementary school kids' needs around safety are going to be a little bit different than the high schoolers and things like that. But regulations, that's not something that we can change, right? So that is a baseline requirement. Any kind of proposal that gets put up would have to meet the regulatory requirements. Same thing with transportation. We are working on transportation. Obviously, there are challenges there, and it's a very complicated topic. And so we're not really going to talk that much about transportation tonight, just because there's a lot of influences that are outside of our control. And so while this is a factor of the decision making, it's one that's always going to be there. And so these three are minimum requirements. We have to meet the standards. We will talk a little bit more about what the safety standard is, but we have to meet these two standards. So, all right. So what we're going to do today, and it looks like we're right about on time, is we're going to go over into the cafeteria just so that you got a little bit more room. And I'm going to break you up into small groups, and so we have a station for each one of those priority areas. What I want you to do at those stations is talk in your group and say, is this the right goal? Is this really what we want to achieve with our school schedule? And if so, well, what does this goal mean to you? So this was the example that I shared earlier. There's a lot of, again, there's a lot of ambiguity in some of these goal statements. We need you all to tell us how to make it real, what that means for you. What does success for this schedule look like for you? The other thing also is the worksheets that are out at these stations. Those are going to mean you might have different goals for different grades, and that's fine. We want to be cognizant of the fact that what works for elementary school students is different than what high school students need, and so on and so forth. And so we don't want to box you in necessarily to kind of think about everybody all at once. So if there are nuances between what you think these goals should be for the different grade bands, then we definitely want to hear about that. Once we do this small discussion, what we're going to do then is we will have these up. We're going to give you dots to vote with, and you are going to help us understand what goals are most important to you. So we're going to give you 5 stickers, and then you're going to use those 5 stickers. You can spend them however you want. You can say, this is the most important priority for me. Maybe you put 3 stickers on that to show that it's really, really important, or at a minimum, just kind of taking those 5 and making sure that we understand if this is the one thing driving this decision, this is what I think it should be. Okay? We will come back to that discussion, those instructions here in a second. But again, what we want you to do is really kind of think about, is it the right goal? And then make it real for us. What does that look like for you? Okay? All right, so we're going to get up and be moving around. What we're going to do is we'll go over here. Let's break up into small groups. So there are 7 different stations. And then what we're going to do is, 5 to 10 minutes. As we kind of rotate, when you come up to a new station, if somebody has written something and you're like, oh yeah, heck yeah, I agree with that, just give a little check mark as a cosign, okay? So that we know that, there are a lot of people feeling that idea. All right, so let's get the blood pumping and roll up our sleeves.